A woman is sharing a terrifying story of being the victim of an alleged wolf in sheep's clothing. How the man she loved allegedly turned violent, beating her, strangling her, and kidnapping her, allegedly planning to blow her up in a house filled with gas. How it all started with a warm-cooked meal and how she survived what could have been her last day on Earth. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. A woman in Nebraska is telling her story of survival at the hands of a man who she thought she knew, who she thought she loved, but he allegedly turned into a monster fast. This is Jesserae Beck. She's born and raised in Nebraska. She lives in the capital city of Lincoln. She has 2 kids, and she was a single parent. But she tells KOLN TV in Nebraska that she thought she found her person in July of last year. He was a man who owned real estate properties. His name, Christopher Collins. Eventually, these two would plan on moving forward with IVF in hopes of having a child together. It was that serious. But then, she says Collins changed, allegedly fast and violent. She told the TV station that in August, Collins allegedly attacked her. She says she had never seen him act like that before. He was arrested in August on charges of assault by strangulation, and there was a protection order that was put in place. But then she says that she started to talk to Collins again, and they decided that they wanted to move forward with their relationship, to put all their history behind them and still go on with those plans of IVF, potentially one day having a child together. On September 24th, the protective order was lifted, and that was at the request of Jesserae. That night, she planned on bringing over a warm meal to Christopher's house as they rekindled their relationship. She left the home around 10 o'clock. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the kids hadn't heard from their mom, so they called the police. The SWAT team responded to the home of Christopher Collins. The couple wasn't there. However, police say there were signs of a struggle, and that is when they put out an alert that Jesserae could be in danger. They put out surveillance footage of Collins in the car that the two may be riding in. Jesserae says that Collins attacked her when she got to his home. He allegedly hit her so hard she was knocked unconscious. In fact, she told KOLN TV in this interview, quote, "He actually thought I was dead, essentially. He didn't know what to do." She said when she woke up, she was in a different house. Collins allegedly moved her to a rental property that he owned. She suffered head trauma, internal bleeding, broken ribs. She said that she laid next to Christopher Collins, her alleged attacker, in a bed for hours, unsure whether she was going to live. She also said, quote, "He had zero intention of both of us making it out. I remember Chris getting up after me and grabbing a glass bottle of Tito's, and he slammed it on my head. Then he got on top of me trying to strangle me." Jesserae also said Collins was pumping the house with natural gas. He allegedly planned to blow up the home with both of them inside. But then, later that day, help arrived.
We have found Jesserae Beck safe. She has been transported to a local hospital, and Christopher Collins is in custody. Today was a true show of the grit and determination of the officers and investigators at the Lincoln Police Department. They worked fast and furiously today, developing information through their investigative means to ultimately bring us here tonight, where we used our SWAT team to again make entry into a home in the 200 block of Santa Fe. With that, when we made entry, it was very clear that there was a heavy odor of natural gas. So after quickly rescuing Jesserae and taking Christopher Collins into custody, we backed out and waited for our partners with Lincoln Fire and Rescue, as well as clearing several homes of the neighbors to make sure that they were safe.
The SWAT team busted into the house and they rescued Jesserae, and then, after they say a struggle with Collins, they were able to take him into custody. They had to clear the neighborhood because the amount of natural gas in the air, it was that dangerous. Not just the houses next door, but the entire neighborhood had to be cleared out. In getting ready for this story, I put Christopher Collins' name into truthfinder.com, and it showed that he does own several rental properties in the Lincoln, Nebraska area. Not just his home, but also the place where police say they had to rescue Jesserae Beck. We use TruthFinder here at Law and Crime, just like this, to learn more information about the people who are involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great tool. You can use it to get some peace of mind because it is one of the largest public record search services in the US, and it has a paid subscription service that you can use to get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Here's an image per KOLN of Collins making his first appearance in court in Lincoln. He was arraigned on charges of kidnapping, terroristic threats, and the use of a weapon to commit a felony. His bond was set at 10% of $10 million, so obviously $1 million bond. He's due back in court in November. As for Jesserae, she is just beginning her road to recovery. Not only does it take so much strength to go on television and to tell your story about what happened, she says she suffers from PTSD, from brain damage. She has metal pins in her ribs and she needs a walker to keep her balance. She does have a GoFundMe that is live. She is using it to raise money to help with her recovery. Here's a link to it here. It has already raised thousands of dollars. Join us now to talk about this case is criminal defense attorney John Day. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. This case is just horrific, what this woman went through, no doubt about that. Of course, we'll say alleged because the suspect is innocent until proven guilty. But I'm sure in your line of work, you have seen a lot of domestic violence cases. What stands out to you about this one?
Right. Horrific, Chris. It's exactly what it is. And in this particular case, I mean, all domestic violence cases are troubling, of course. This one really is sort of off the charts with the facts alleged by this woman, by law enforcement. A horrible situation where she's being abused, beaten, all sorts of physical violence. And then there's this element where she says he was trying to, the perpetrator's trying to blow up the house with natural gas when, police rush in. So it is emblematic of what happens in a relationship when it turns violent. And this one just went off the charts.
It seems, from her perspective, everything in the relationship was fine. He had never done anything violent. And then they had an incident in August where she says he did get violent and he was arrested on that. He was charged for that. And there was a protective order that was put into place for about, it seems, roughly a month. And then she asked to have that protective order taken away because she felt like that was something that they could move past. And that's certainly her right, her decision. And I guess in cases where someone may be emotionally attached to someone and there's still that danger, though, that's there, like what can the law do to protect someone even when that order is taken away?
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack here. And in former life, I was a prosecutor and I prosecuted hundreds and hundreds of domestic violence cases. And what we're seeing here is sort of a classic, an unfortunately classic situation where the person who's being abused, often it's a woman, not always, gets a restraining order. Now, the point of these is, if there's an initial incident, police show up at a house, there's an arrest made, the police will often say, hey, you should go to court and get a domestic violence restraining order. Most jurisdictions have a very specialized section of the courts that handle domestic violence cases, staffed with clerks who can give information to the people who are being abused to get these restraining orders. At the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. It's a judge telling somebody, stay away from this person, don't have any contact with them, don't communicate with them, don't post on social media about them. And it is just a piece of paper. The idea behind it is that it's the force of a court order telling someone, don't talk to this person, don't contact them, don't communicate with them. And violating a domestic violence restraining order is often a criminal offense in and of itself, usually, though, just a misdemeanor. In this case, when we see this a lot, the woman apparently went back to court and for whatever reason, she said, I want to dismiss that order and I basically want to have contact with this person. That's not an unusual situation. A lot of times the person who's being abused feels like, I think I can get through this. We're going to try to make it work. We're going to get back together. Sometimes they're engaged in counseling. Not always. We don't have any indication that happened here. But because they want to reconnect with the person who is under the abuse order, under the no contact order, they'll go into court and they'll say, I want to dismiss this. Now, in this particular case, that happened, but did things get better? No, they didn't. They got, exponentially worse for the woman. And so we see that. It's understandable. I think if you talk to domestic violence advocates and mental health counselors, they talk about why somebody in that position would want to go and try to make things better by dismissing the order. In this case, it failed miserably.
Yeah, and I was long-winded with my question because I want to be delicate. I mean, it's not victim blaming by any means. She, made the call that she felt like she was going to be safe with him, and it's on him that he allegedly was not. If, though, in a case, because apparently what had happened, before we get to the September incident where she nearly lost her life, but it was still a pretty allegedly violent event in August that she went through that led to this protective order. When a victim comes forward and says, because there are examples of people who get drawn back into a relationship, I guess how much weight does her say have in having that order dropped compared to a judge looking and being, this is just not a safe situation for you until this, legal process plays out related to the charges that he was facing because of what happened in August?
Right. And it's a good point to make. Sometimes a judge, oftentimes when someone walks in, if they're the person who's being protected by this order of protection, they make a choice. They want to go in and get it dismissed. They'll go in and they'll file a dismissal. Judges have discretion. They can say, well, why are you doing this? What's going on? A lot of times, though, if the person walks in, files the request to dismiss the protection order, a court's going to sign off on that because for whatever reason, they say, look, you had this order in place and now you've chosen to dismiss it. We'll go ahead and honor that request. If you talk to the mental health professionals and the domestic violence advocates, though, there always is a concern that someone who's doing that is doing it under some type of pressure, from the person who is the abuser. And so you always have to be wary about those situations. Sometimes it's a legitimate reason. Look, we're working on this. We're in counseling. We got kids together. Whatever the reason is, there are legitimate reasons why, say, a woman in that situation would want to dismiss the restraining order. And sometimes there's successful outcomes. But a lot of times, of course, if you are in this field, whether you're a prosecutor, defense lawyer, judge, law enforcement, advocate, mental health therapist, whatever, you always have to ask the question, what's going on behind the scenes that makes you want to come in and dismiss this? Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's complex, but the courts are generally going to honor someone's request to dismiss that order. The problem is once it's dismissed, does that generate some new animosity? Does that allow the person who's the abuser to move forward and say, okay, I've got that taken care of? And does that reignite some of the same problems that this couple might have faced? So there's always going to be some skepticism when someone wants to dismiss an order like that. And again, at the end of the day, it simply is just a piece of paper, but it does provide some level of protection and court supervision over a domestic violence situation.
And, again, it's hard to go through what she went through, the idea of being beaten, strangled, nearly blown up, and apparently he was trying to, from what police have said, take both of their lives. There's a lot of evidence there based off of her injuries that she's still recovering from right now. How likely is it if this were to go to trial that she would have to face him in court and testify about what happened?
Right. Well, that's what has to happen generally if this case is going to be prosecuted. And that's one of the issues that if you realize in this field, in the domestic violence prosecution's defense, when they're in court, this is something that happens. I mean, the person who's being abused, the victim, is told by the prosecutors, look, if we go to trial, he's going to be sitting there at the defense table. We're going to have to call you to testify about what happened. And that is something, it's the reality of domestic violence prosecutions. And that's why prosecutors' offices have staff that will generally work with victims, try to get them ready for a trial. But that's one of the problems here with these kinds of cases, is the fact that a domestic violence victim may have to go to court, whether it's in a restraining order situation or a criminal prosecution situation. They may have to go to court and face that person across a courtroom. Sometimes they're ready to go. Sometimes they want to do it. Sometimes it is so horribly painful and difficult and traumatic that they make a choice. Look, I'd rather not pursue this because I can't be in the same room with this person. And again, you have to ask, in this particular case, if this poor woman's being victimized like this, Why would she want to go back to a person who's capable of doing that? Again, that gets into issues of that mental health professionals would have to address. Why someone who's abused would go back to their abuser. It's a very deep, multi-layered situation, but you see it time and time again.
The suspect's being held on, it was an interesting way to phrase it, because there's some states when you're facing charges like this, you aren't granted the opportunity to have bond. Then in sometimes it's low and someone's able to bond out. In this case, it's 10% of $10 million. And when I saw that, just my question was, why would it not just be you're being held on $1 million bail?
And it depends. Jurisdictions differ on this, but a judge may have said, okay, I'm holding you on 10% of 10 million. If you can put up $1 million, you can get out. But if you jump bail, you violate your conditions, you're going to owe us $10 million. Now, theoretically, that's a lot of money. The reality is, people in this situation, most situations, can't put up $1 million. They're going to stay in jail. But it's a judge's way of saying, if you violate, if you are able to post a bond and get out, and you violate, you're going to owe us 10 times the amount that we're looking at here. So it's just one more tool in the judge's toolbox to try to keep control over a criminal defendant.
The suspect in this case, Jesserae Beck was found in a rental property. So $1 million, when thinking of home prices and the value of that, it's not out of the possibility that he might be able to post bond, depending on, if he wanted to put the value of his homes up. If he's able to come forward, even though he clearly was a danger, not just to this woman, but if he is filling gas in his home, they had to clear out the entire neighborhood. Everyone was in danger because of this guy. What would happen if he came forward and said, I can post bond and get out on that $1 million?
Well, if that's what the judge said, and this person can come up with the amount that the judge requires, then they post it and he'd get released. He'd be on conditions of release. Obviously, in a case like this, it would be very strict, no contact with the victim. You can't leave the jurisdiction, you can't leave the state. You've got to check in with a pretrial services person, probably. You might be on an electronic monitor. So there would be lots of conditions that a court would put on this. But when a judge is setting these bonds, oftentimes they'll have some basic information about the defendant's financial status and net worth and ability to make a bond. Sometimes people surprise you in court and they are able to post remarkably high bonds, and they do get out. And of course, if there's a violation, if they skip town, if they don't show up to court, that bond gets forfeited. So, it does happen. It's rare that someone can put up that much, but there are certainly cases where it does happen. And that's why you have, very strict conditions of release, things like the electronic monitor, ankle bracelets, things like that.
And certainly the criminal case is of a lot of importance when it comes to Jesserae Beck, the victim. But I did see that she's also exploring some civil options. What would those look like or would you even need a guilty conviction to be able to sue this suspect civilly?
Short answer is no, you would not need a conviction. If you wanted to sue your abuser, and it does happen, you can sue in civil court. Remember, the standard in a civil case is lower than the beyond a reasonable doubt standard in criminal cases. It's really just the preponderance of the evidence in civil cases. So if you want another tool to go against your abuser, if you want to take action against someone who you say has abused you, that's one way to do it. Is the abuser judgment proof? Are there assets? Is there some reason that someone who's a victim would say, I think that this is the way to I can get justice not only in the criminal courts, but maybe in the civil courts. And we do see that that does happen, where victims sue their abusers and it proceeds onward. And it's a way, I got to say, psychologically, it's another way for victims of domestic violence to fight back, to feel like they're regaining control over the situation by not only having their abuser facing criminal charges and the potential for incarceration, but also, hitting them where it hurts if they do have assets, saying, look, I need to get compensated for what you did to me, and this is what I'm doing. I'm filing a civil lawsuit alleging things like battery, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, pain and suffering. There is another avenue other than the criminal courts for victims to go after their abusers, and you do see it.
Just hearing what this woman went through, again, it's an absolute nightmare, and not being, using hyperbole to say that. Truly, just everything she talked about was an absolute horror scene. But this defendant is going to have a defense attorney, and if she takes the stand, even though she's had injuries that'll probably last her a lifetime, the testimony, if she explains what happened from her perspective, that could be incredibly powerful to the jury. As a defense attorney, how do you go about cross-examining someone like this woman who's been through so much?
Yeah, it's certainly a tough situation if you're trying to defend a client in that situation. You've got to be very gentle. You've got to be very strategic. You've got to be very, you sort of got to be using a scalpel rather than an axe that's dull. You've got to be very specific and precise in what you're trying to get from the testimony. And is it, if you're defending a case, is it, look, this person is making this whole story up, or there's a motivation here, there's a motive that we have to get into? I mean, it's very tough, but a person who is charged in this case, this guy in this case, the defendant, he's entitled to a defense. He's entitled to challenge, make the state prove the charges against him to a jury or to a judge, depending. So if you're defending it, you've got to do a complete investigation of it and find out, is this really what happened? And are there reasons that this person, the alleged victim's story, doesn't hold up? Are there reasons that has this happened before? Or is this something where there's a fabrication or an exaggeration or whatever it is? No question, these are difficult cases to defend, but at the end of the day, the defendant has the right to make the prosecution prove its case in front of a jury or a judge.
We'll see how it plays out. John Day, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.